Good morning, and welcome to the First Existentialist Congregation of Atlanta. We are a philosophically based spiritual community founded on existential philosophy and feminist principles and dedicated to the human liberation and the protection of the natural world. My name is Patton White, and I will be facilitating this morning's celebration of life. I'd like to start off with a simple land acknowledgement. The First Existentialist Congregation of Atlanta acknowledges that its sanctuary and the homes of most of its members stand on land taken from indigenous Muskogee Creek people. In the 19th century, the United States of America forcibly seized Muskogee and Aniunuia, or Cherokee lands, for the plantation economy of Georgia and other profitable ventures that continue to benefit many Caucasian Georgians today through generational wealth. Our opening words in observance, I'll say, of today's date, July 4th. Jonathan Weber argues that, as originally defined by Simone de Beauvoir and Jean-Paul Sartre, existentialism is the ethical theory that we ought to treat the freedom at the core of human existence as intrinsically valuable and the foundation of all other values. So with that little preamble, I offer this poem entitled Freedom by Langston Hughes. Freedom will not come today, this year, nor ever, through compromise and fear. I have as much right as the other fellow has to stand on my 2 feet and own the land. I tire so of hearing people say, "Let things take their course. Tomorrow is another day." I do not need my freedom when I'm dead. I cannot live on tomorrow's bread. Freedom is a strong seed planted in a great need. I live here, too. I want my freedom just as you. And today we will have as our congregational song, Freedom is a Constant Struggle. So please rise and body your spirit as you are willing and able, and join in singing Freedom is a Constant Struggle with our musicians Mick Kinney, Gene Heinrich, and Robert Stewart. Thank you so much, musicians. Freedom is a constant struggle. This morning we have Anthony Knight back with us. Anthony Knight is the president and CEO of the Baton Foundation, a Georgia nonprofit organization that serves the emotional, intellectual, and cultural needs of Black boys in grades 5 through 9. Before founding the foundation, Mr. Knight worked for 22 years as a museum educator and consultant. Mr. Knight has extensive experience with and interest in African American history and culture, public and living history, informal education, and Black youth. Mr. Knight's work with the Baton Foundation reflects his ongoing interest in the issues and practices related to the collecting, preservation, and interpretation of information about and material culture from the African Diaspora. Mr. Knight's undergraduate work was in Spanish and English from Ohio Wesleyan University, and his graduate work was in museum education at the George Washington University. Mr. Knight also holds a degree in Spanish to English translation from the Núcleo de Estudios Lingüísticos y Sociales, Caracas, Venezuela. Mr. Knight is a New York City native. Please join me in welcoming Anthony Knight.
Greetings, First E, and I hope everyone is doing well. I hope you're having a great Sunday and that you've had a great week. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you today, as I always enjoy doing so. Today's talk is entitled The Paradox of Independence, or I Too Dream America. Black people born in the United States grow up in cultures across the nation that inherently, quietly, do not value them. This is fact. Tragically, Black people are citizens in a foreign land, by many not seen as the rightful heirs to the fruits of this country's bounty, much less to the protections granted by its laws or to the protocols dictated by its tools of civic engagement. In his 1965 Oxford University debate with William F. Buckley, James Baldwin poignantly illuminates this fact. He says, quote, "It comes as a great shock around the age of 5 or 6 or 7 to discover that the flag to which you have pledged allegiance, along with everybody else, has not pledged allegiance to you. It comes as a great shock to discover that the country which is your birthplace and to which you owe your life and your identity has not, in its whole system of reality, evolved a place for you. The disaffection, the demoralization, and the gap between one person and another only on the basis of the color of their skin begins there and accelerates throughout a whole lifetime," close quote. Since November 2020, many in the United States have focused on and rallied against the former president's quote-unquote big lie, as well they should. Few, though, decry the bigger lies upon which the nation was built and upon which, in significant ways, it is sustained. Fewer still willingly acknowledge the benefits they derive from such lies. 113 years before Baldwin's iconic debate on July 5, 1852, Frederick Douglass delivered a searing speech in Rochester, New York, to the Rochester Ladies Anti-Slavery Society. In his speech, Douglass spoke eloquently yet unflinchingly about the nation's hypocrisy, a hypocrisy that endures, one that Baldwin and other great thinkers have challenged and continue to challenge. Correctly, Douglass poses the question, what have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? Douglass continues, quote, I say it with a sad sense of the disparity between us. I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you, this day, rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice. I must mourn. Close quote. For centuries, scholars and lay people alike have struggled with this country's genetically engineered duality, referred to by some as the country's original sin. Independence versus bondage, freedom versus oppression, ultimately white versus other, especially black. And honestly, I'm tired of talking about it. When I was a little boy, my paternal grandparents always celebrated the 4th of July. We either traveled south to see extended family in Georgia and Florida to enjoy the holiday with them, or my grandmother would plan a big outdoor barbecue on the grounds of her Long Island home. In New York, the school year ends in late June. The 4th of July was the second signal. The first was the release bell on the last day of school that I was on summer break. But for weeks before the 4th, while my siblings and I were dragging through the dog days of the academic year, I could feel the excitement building at my grandparents' home when we visited on weekends. If we were going south, open suitcases would be laid about the living room with new summer clothes in them in preparation for the long road trip. On the other hand, if my grandmother were hosting one of her extravagant 4th of July affairs, every available space and corner in the dining room would be chock full of items to pull off one of her lavish outdoor holiday soirees. It never occurred to me, really, to think more deeply about the meaning of the 4th of July. Aside from the founding stories we all learned in school, it never once crossed my mind that this simple, almost banal holiday was so pregnant with pain and trauma, and that my ancestors were at its center. Indeed, I would be in my 40s, living here in Atlanta, before I would learn of Frederick Douglass's 1852 speech and begin to reframe how I thought and felt about the 4th of July. And while my initial reading of Douglass's speech gave me pause, the events of the past decade or so, including those have brought, the 4th of July is officially dead to me. I only wish my grandparents were still alive. I wonder what they might think about how I feel. In her 2005 book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, Dr. Joy DeGruy talks about how the form of slavery that took root in the United States was predicated on the belief, some argued science, that Africans and later African Americans were inherently and genetically inferior to whites. After all, why else would one violently steal human beings from another continent over 5,000 miles away and force them to work against their will in his own land? Dr. DeGruy argues that to do this, those involved on every level of the slave trade were in states of cognitive dissonance. That is, the behavior in which they were involved, enslaving and brutalizing human beings, was in direct opposition to fact-based knowledge that those they were enslaving and brutalizing were, in fact, human. Thus, if one does not stop the behavior, it will lead the individual to create ways to rationalize and normalize it. Therefore, Africans are inferior. and so-called science was created to prove that. Blacks are mischievous, rapacious, and violent. Laws were created to keep them in their place. And of course, blacks are lazy and no good, not worthy of the true benefits of citizenship. Accordingly, social structures were created to ensure that blacks do not become co-inheritors of this country's largesse. With each passing year, I am less willing to engage in conversations about race and or the state of race relations in this country. Deny as they might, white people fully understand their privilege. Just ask any random white person on the street if she or he would prefer to be black in this country. And while they may not know all of slavery's gory details, much less many of the institution's principal and or even lesser known players, they know something. And if one knows only that the country in which she or he was born enslaved other human beings, well, for me, that's enough. That fact alone should be a catalyst for any citizen of the United States to want to know more, to want to understand more. For if not, what does it say about the person? The current push in academia, and now on the streets below and around the ivory towers, is to recognize critical race theory as, quote unquote, a thing. Conservative whites mostly, but I'm sure they are not the only ones, are pushing back hard. They argue that they do not want their children to learn that the country in which they were born is inherently racist, which of course is not what critical race theory is. I wonder though, what would they have us call a nation whose early settlers mostly killed off and deceived one group of people to steal their land, and then held captive people from another continent to build the new country? When the people holding the short end of the proverbial stick are black and indigenous, and those holding the long end of said stick are white, it appears to me that race is at the center. To my way of thinking, critical race theory is a non-debate. Museums, archives, libraries, and private collections across the country are replete with the artifacts, documents, and ephemera that chronicle well the history of this country with regards to the enslavement, violence, and brutality visited upon Africans and their descendants at the hands of whites. To suggest otherwise is more of the same, cognitive dissonance. During an interview with the late Pulitzer Prize-winning author Toni Morrison, Charlie Rose asked her if, with all her academic and honors and the rest, she still had encounters with race. Morrison responded in the affirmative, but quickly pivoted. She went on to tell Rose that he was asking the wrong question. Gotta love an intellectual diva. Morrison said the right question is, quote, how do you feel? Not you, Charlie Rose. But don't you understand that the people who do this thing, that practice racism, are bereft? There's something distorted about the psyche. It's a huge waste, and it's a corruption and a distortion. It's like it's a profound neuroses that no one examines for what it is. It feels crazy. It is crazy. And it has just as much of a deleterious effect on white people, and possibly equally, as it does black people. End quote. Morrison continued by adding, quote, but when you take it away, and she was referring to race, if I take away your race, and there you are all strung out, and all you've got is your little self. And what is that? What are you without racism? Are you any good? Are you still strong? Are you still smart? Do you like yourself? If you can only be tall because somebody is on their knees, then you have a serious problem. And my feeling is white people have a very, very serious problem, and they should start thinking about what they can do about it. Take me out of it, end quote. This 4th of July feels very much like Toni Morrison. Of things related to race, take me out of it. This celebration of freedom was not meant for my, nor does it me these couple of centuries later, in 2021. It, for me, is a hollow festival, one whose very nature implies genocide, violence, and barbarism, dressed in decorative regalia though it might be. I, too, dream America. My freedom, though, is not paradoxical, nor is it granted. Freedom is my birthright. Thank you so much, and I look forward to talking with you on the other side, as they say.
Thank you again, Anthony, for being with us this morning. Please join us on Zoom immediately following today's broadcast. You may find the link to the Zoom meeting in the comments or the chat section of today's broadcast. Please join us next week for Reverend Kim Palmer and her talk, Transitions, Loss and Opportunity. We hope to see you either on Zoom right after this or next Sunday at 11 a.m. Until then, have a great rest of your day today, a great week, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.